Zero risk, maximum returns. Mastering stock market linked investments. Available on Amazon, paperback and Kindle. See info below in video description. Book provided by the author, Brooke Lunsford. Thank you for watching. Your support really does help this channel grow. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment.
And it will be relevant also to sharing your faith with non-Jewish people. So it's going to be a real practical thing. Today is something very different, though. Today is, I hate to say it, especially because some of the kids are here. How many of you kids just love history? Yeah, that's what I thought. Oh, okay, all right. Cool. Well, today what I want to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about Jewish culture and history, but I have one goal in mind. The goal today is to help you understand the reaction you get when you try to share Jesus with Jewish people. I want to help you understand how you are viewed and why by the Jewish people that you know. Does that make sense? So I guess Cliff is not in here. He had to leave. He's teaching. Oh, that's right. I saw he's teaching. Well, before the service this morning, as we were about to pray, Cliff shared with me that he tried sharing his faith in Jesus with a Jewish woman that worked where he did, and he was like, I think he's going to talk about it on Wednesday night, but he was like, whoa, I was so surprised. It was so unbelievable, and the negative reaction that he got. And I'm going to try, if he was here now, I guess he would walk away understanding why, at least in part, he got that reaction. So we're going to do our best to make this interesting. It's interesting to me, so, all right. Yes, it does. It does. We're going to go through 4,000 years of Jewish history and culture in less than 40 minutes. How's that? So you can see we ain't going to cover much, but just a few points. What's that? A minute per century, yeah. You know, where else can you get something like that? Only Jews for Jesus. Okay. Old Testament history. All right, I'm just a real couple of points. First of all, who is a Jew? Who is considered Jewish? Well, I hate to have to use these. Obviously, a descendant of the people with whom God made a covenant through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Typically, in the Bible, it was actually through the father that Jewishness passed. God said to Moses, I want you to count the Jewish people according to their fathers' households. Count the Israelites, we were called then. Count the Israelites according to their fathers' households. That's the beginning of Numbers, where you find that. And so normatively through the Bible, Jewishness was passed through the father. And you read all those genealogies, you know, this dad and that dad and the father of the father of the father of. But today, Jewishness, according to the rabbis, goes through the mother. All right? What happened? Why? Well, because Jewish people have been persecuted quite a bit through history, and we're going to go into some of that. It was probably during the Roman period where the rabbis, and Jewish women would get raped and become, pregnant oftentimes. And so the rabbi said, look, we don't want to lose these children to the community. We don't know who the father is, but sure, we know who the mother is, so we will consider those kids Jewish. So Jewishness today, normatively, is through if the mother is Jewish. In our ministry, this is our authority, but there are examples of only the mother being Jewish as well. Think about Jesus, okay? His dad wasn't Jewish, but his dad was God the Father. But his mother, Miriam, or Mary, was Jewish. So we consider Jesus to be Jewish. So from our point of view, whether the mother or the father is Jewish, the child is Jewish. In our view, there's no such thing as being half Jewish. A lot of people say, I'm half Jewish. It's like, is that the top or the bottom, the front or the back? You are or you aren't. So you understand how that changed. Now, in the Bible, and even today, you're familiar with the concept the Jews are the chosen people. The chosen people. And that is so often misused. It can be said with, it can be understood with a little bit of arrogance at times. We're chosen. We're God's favorite. We're the ones. We get an automatic ticket. Or, all kinds of concepts. What does it mean to be the chosen people? Well, we were not chosen for privilege. We were chosen for service. Okay? In other words, and it was in your bulletin this morning. How cool is that? Exodus 19. At Mount Sinai, we got our marching orders. What did it say there? And it's echoed in 1 Peter 2. That we were to be, part of what it says is a kingdom of priests. And in the New Testament it calls it a royal priesthood. It means the same thing. A kingdom of priests. Okay? What is a priest? You guys aren't Catholic, but go for it. What's a priest? We'll try a little bit of participation if the time allows. What's a priest? What does it do? One who makes sacrifices. Yes. In other words, those sacrifices are acts of worship to God. So he represents the people to God, and at the same time he represents God to the people by teaching them about God's ways. All right? So if we're a kingdom of priests, in other words, all of us Israelites or us in the church, if we are priests, well, what does that mean? Who are we standing between God and whom? Well, the answer is, we're not to each other, we're not priests because we're all priests. Our marching orders from Sinai, implicit in that was the statement that we should represent God to the other nations and the other nations to God. We were to make him known to the peoples of the earth. And that's the continuous mission that we have in the church. That's why we are a royal priesthood. So in other words, that's what we were chosen for, to serve God in that way. Now, you ask a Jewish person, what does it mean that you're God's, what does it mean you're the chosen people? You'll get all kinds of answers. And I think a lot of times with the Jewish people that you'll get that kind of deer in the headlights stare as they kind of think about this. I don't know. I just know we are. Most Jewish people today are not very religious, and out of the Jewish people that I would imagine many might fit into that category. But okay, we're done with the Old Testament. All right, there's a couple thousand years right there. Now. We're moving to the New Testament, and I'm only going to bring up one point there, and that is that when Jesus came, he said he was the fulfillment of the promises to our people, that he was the promised Messiah, and that began a family feud. All right, in the Jewish community, you are, no, you're not, he is, no, he isn't, and it was, you see in the pages of the New Testament, a lot of conflict. And that's what it was all about. In John chapter 9, which is a very colorful story of this blind guy getting healed, you see in there an amazing statement. Near the end there, I think it's verse 22, that any Jewish person, this is the leadership says, any Jewish person who stands up in the community and says, Jesus is the Messiah, they're out of the synagogue. They get kicked out. They get ostracized. And so what we see there is that has been the case. This is before the crucifixion, before the resurrection, that they made that determination, that decision, and it's been that way ever since. We who are Jews, who are believers in Jesus, the writer of the Hebrews used the term outside the camp. I mean, we're out of the community. We're out of the synagogue. We are not welcome. So this family feud began. We're done with the New Testament. All right, we are now going to enter the post-biblical period. I know all of you who, never mind. 3 important dates. Again, there is a point to all this, and it'll become clear. 70 A.D., the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed. Okay? When that temple was destroyed, of course, that was a major crisis in Judaism. I won't go into all of what it meant. But the Romans expelled the Jewish people from the land. But it wasn't a final expulsion because they allowed us back. And so we still had a presence in the land until there was a second revolt. The Jewish people rebelled against Rome again. And when we did it again in 135 A.D., the Romans really got upset with us. We were just so feisty and unsubmissive. They really wanted to crush us in a final sense. And they did so, and they expelled us again. But a couple things happened. I wonder if water would be good. Yeah. Thanks. A couple things happened. Number one, the leading rabbi of the day was a guy named Akiva. Now, Akiva, he's a big hero in Judaism. He started out kind of worldly. You don't have to remember all this stuff. Your Jewish friends don't know this stuff anyway. And he became a rabbi, became quite a sage, and he was a martyr when the Romans put down the revolt. He became a martyr. And the story goes that they actually tore his skin off of him while he was alive, and his last words were the Shema, Deuteronomy 6:4, Hear, O Israel, the Lord thy God, the Lord is one. And all Jewish people are supposed to do that now as we die, based on Akiva's kind of setting that example. But Akiva did something that he was wrong on. He said there was a guy named Bar Kokhba who was the Messiah. Okay? Now, I forgot to point something out. This is important. When in the year 70, the Romans, kind of crushed our rebellion at that time, I forgot to tell you that the Jewish believers in Jesus, we were going to fight along our countrymen against the Romans. But because when the Romans surrounded Jerusalem, that sounded awfully familiar with what Jesus had told us in Matthew 24, that when you see this happen and that happen, it's time to get out of here. So the Jewish Christians, they left, all right? They left, they went across the Jordan River, and when they came back, our Jewish countrymen said, gee, thanks, but no thanks. What kind of people are you? You left us, you didn't fight with us, you're sort of traitors. There was a great beginning of a split between the Jewish Christians and the rest of the Jewish people. That's important to remember because now, thanks, in 135, when this stuff happened, the Jewish Christians said, all right, we're in there. We know what happened last time. We had to obey our Lord, but we're definitely going to fight with you this time. But now, all of a sudden, Akiva says that Bar Kokhba is the Messiah, and that's the banner under which we're supposed to fight. So it's like, oh, why'd you go and have to do that? We can't fight with you again, because we know he's not the Messiah. We know the true Messiah. There's no way we're going to uphold that mistaken notion of Akiva. So we didn't fight again. So it became, at that point, kind of a final split between the Jewish Christians and the rest of the Jewish community. But something else also happened, and that is, does anybody have a Bible here? Let's see. I need a Bible with maps. Does yours have maps? All right. Let's see here. Oh, look at this. I'm glad it worked. All right. I always take a chance. He's got maps in the back, and this map is called Palestine in the time of Jesus. Okay? This is one of my pet peeves. This is not accurate. Thank you. No. See, what happened was that land back then was called Judah, or Israel in the north, what have you. But by that time, by Jesus' time, it was really just Judah or Judea. And when you read your New Testament, you see Judea or Samaria, Galilee. Those were kind of the names of the areas. The Romans, when they kicked the Jews out in 135 A.D., as a direct insult to the Jews, they renamed the land Palestine, because linguistically it's from the word Philistine. who were the arch enemies of the Jewish people in the Old Testament, right? So they said, you Jews, we're done with you. We've crushed your rebellion. You're out of here. And now the land is named after your worst nightmare, your worst enemy, the Philistines. We're calling it Palestine. So there was no Palestine in the days of Jesus. Jesus lived well before 135 AD. I don't know why scholars do that. I still haven't figured it out. But to a Jewish ear, you got to realize it doesn't sound good. And today, with all politically what's going on in Israel, it even has political overtones. So if you're talking with your Jewish friend and, in Palestine when Jesus... No, that's not right. And it won't sound good. So anyway, we got that straight. One last post-biblical date is 325 AD, the Council of Nicaea. Now, the Council of Nicaea was a good thing. There were a lot of heresies. We won't go into all that. That's the pastor's job, to teach you about the creeds and the doctrines of our church and all of that. There was a lot of heretical sects, and one of the big issues on the table was the nature of Christ. Is he God, man, a man who, a spirit, flesh, and they needed to hammer that out. And they did a good job articulating our faith. It was nothing new. They just put good words to it, so it was very clear. However, the Council of Nicaea, unfortunately, was also laced with anti-Semitism. There had been a succession of bishops or church leaders in Jerusalem that were all Jewish for a number of years. There were still Jewish church leaders at this time. None were invited. And Constantine and the others who convened the thing, here's a quote. One of the things they did, I forgot. They divorced the celebration of the resurrection, which we call Easter. They divorced it from the week of Passover. It was the third day of Passover week. Well, there had already been somewhat of a debate, because if you do it on the third day of Passover week, because of the differences in calendars, it's not a Sunday every year. Well, it's so often called the first day of the week because as it was historically the first day of the week, and some wanted to preserve it on a Sunday, and there was all this debate. Anyway, they decided to change the dating of Easter, so now it's based on this, whatever it is, the equinox in the spring and I don't know. It's complicated. But there was one of the leaders at Nicaea said, let us have nothing in common with this odious people, the Jews. They wanted to, part of their agenda was to separate a lot of church things from Jewish things. They didn't want to be dependent on the Hebrew calendar, the Jewish calendar. They didn't want it to be in any way related to Passover week. There was a lot of things that happened there. Some Christians could see the Jewish roots of the faith, and some were even being drawn to the synagogue, and the church leaders wanted to put a stop to that. And so a lot of that took place, unfortunately, around that time. St. John Chrysostom, I guess you'd say. His name means the golden-mouthed. He lived in the 3rd century, so I'm going a little bit before Nicaea now. He was called the golden-mouthed because he was one of the best preachers in the church. He is widely known and remembered for his eloquent preaching. And his sermons were used for centuries as examples of how to preach. They were taught to young, upcoming church leaders and preachers, pastors. At the same time as being a wonderful preacher, he also had a lot of very, very negative attitudes toward Jewish people, and he preached against Jews quite often. And so I'll give you one quote from St. John Chrysostom. I can't say it right. Quote, "The synagogue was a criminal assembly of Jews, in a place of meeting for the assassins of Christ, a house worse than a drinking shop, a den of thieves, a house of ill fame, a dwelling of iniquity, the refuge of devils, a gulf and abyss of perdition." So unfortunately, as people studied his sermons, they learned not only how to preach, but they also took in these very, very negative attitudes toward Jewish people. And that was, and that happened through centuries. This is all going to culminate later. We're building to something, okay? I'm just putting various building blocks together here. And this is not comfortable material, I realize. But again, I want to remind you, I want to help you understand why when you try to share with a Jewish person, you get the reaction you do today. All right? Even if they don't know all this history, they're reacting because of all this. All right. We're going to go to the Middle Ages now. And I think we're doing okay for time, actually. The Middle Ages was not a great time to be Jewish. If you're Jewish, here's what the Middle Ages are known for. First of all, the Crusades. All right? The Crusades, hey, you guys pay attention. You're going to get this stuff in middle school later on, all right? All right. I'm kidding. You can talk quietly. The Crusades began in 1096. It was an attempt to liberate Jerusalem from the Muslims. The Jerusalem was also holy to the Christians, obviously. They wanted to take it back. And these were armies and crowds of people from Europe who were going to come down to Jerusalem. And if you've ever traveled, you can see some of these Crusader castles, and I've been in some myself. Pretty impressive stuff. There was just a movie out, The Kingdom of Heaven. I haven't seen it, but it's on the subject of the Crusaders. Well, I don't know who it first dawned on, but it dawned on someone who said, well, gosh, they were all charged up to go do battle. You can just kind of picture it. And, of course, in the Middle Ages, things are, I was going to say they're more primitive than they are today. I'm not so sure of that. But you can picture these crowds charged up, and they're all ready to go kill somebody. And they're saying, well, why do we have to go kill the enemies of Christ, thousands of miles away in Jerusalem when we have some living right here in our midst, those Jews? They were the Christ killers anyway. Let's practice on them. And so in the First Crusade, 12,000 Jewish people in Europe were slaughtered along the way as they made their way down to Jerusalem. And in every crusade, I think there were 8 crusades, 7 or 8, I'm not sure, that same kind of practice took place. So the Crusades have no wonderful place in a Jewish psyche. We think of getting slaughtered and getting butchered by Christians. That's the way a Jewish person thinks of it. Another thing that happened in the Middle Ages were forced conversions, where the church said, you either convert, become a Christian, or die by the sword, or get expelled from our land. Not great choices. There have always been Jewish believers in Jesus from the time of Jesus to me standing before you today. I'm talking about people who have true faith. Then there are others who convert to Christianity either to save their life or maybe at some points in history for economic advantage or different things. But whatever the motive is to profess Christ, in the Middle Ages, Jewish converts would have to make vows such as this one. Quote, I do here and now renounce every rite and observance of the Jewish religion, detesting all its most solemn ceremonies and tenets that in former days I kept and held. In the future I will practice no rite or celebration connected with it, nor any custom of my past error. I promise that I will never return to the vomit of Jewish superstition. So, in other words, according to the church leaders in the Middle Ages, you could not be a Jew and a Christian. There was no such thing as a Jewish Christian or a Messianic Jew or a Jewish believer in Jesus or a Jew for Jesus. No. There was Christians and there were Jews. You couldn't, if you were a Jew, you became a Christian, you were no longer a Jew. Now, what's very ironic, and I guess normally I mention this later, We don't hear that so much from the church anymore today. I'm allowed to be who God made me to be. He made me a Jewish guy, and He brought me to know the Jewish Messiah. And the church allows me to be a Jew who believes in Jesus, a Jewish Christian. Ironically, it's the Jewish community that learned that lesson oh so well in the Middle Ages, who now say, no, you can't be a Jew and a Christian. You're either one or the other. And boy, I wish they hadn't learned that from the church, but that's where they learned it, and now they are the chief proponents. But also in the Middle Ages is known for disputations. Those are basically debates. They weren't good for the Jews. Here's why. The church would put up their top scholar, and they would say to the Jewish community, send us your top scholar, and we're going to have a debate on the merits or on the truth of Jesus being the deity of Christ, or Him being the promised Jewish Savior, Messiah. And they were no-win situations for the Jewish people. Here's why. If the church scholar won, of course, that would give the church, put them in a mood of triumphalism and we've bested you, we're right and you're wrong. And if the Jewish scholar ever won, which according to history, there was one guy named Nachmanides, a very smart guy, who may have won in his debate, at least in his account he says he won. That wasn't good for the Jewish people either, because now you've embarrassed the church. You've humiliated the church. Now they're not going to be in a triumphalistic mood. They're going to be mad, and they're going to come and do not nice things in our little villages, so to take out their revenge. So it's like, you lose if you win, and you lose if you lose, and so that wasn't good either. Well, a couple more things in the Middle Ages. The laws were passed that Jewish people could not own property. They couldn't farm the land. They couldn't own the land, and they were also kept out of the this is like school stuff, you guys. Hey, no, or maybe it's your age. Okay, I'll focus. It's way after you. Did you ever hear? Did you guys learn about the Middle Ages at all in school? Serfs and lords and vassals, all that stuff. Oh, good. Well, do you remember the craft guilds? Yes. See, I knew they got it. We all got it at one point. Why do they teach us this stuff? All right. Well, anyway, Jewish people were not allowed to be part of the craft guilds either. So what that meant is we couldn't farm the land, we couldn't own the land, we couldn't do metal work, leather work, woodwork, whatever all those crafts are. So what was left? Well, the church also said another thing, and then I'll tell you what was left. The church said to the Christians, you can't lend money to your fellow believers. It's improper for a Christian to loan money to another Christian and charge interest. That's usury. That's, money is kind of a dirty subject anyway. We don't want the Christians dealing with it. Let's let the Jews do it because, they're not our brothers. So they can be money lenders. They can charge interest. No problem. No foul. They can't own land. They can't do crafts. They can handle money. So that was one of the few professions that Jews were forced into doing in the Middle Ages. And we had a language, Yiddish, that spread all through Europe, as opposed to little regional languages. So it helped to have a network for trade and for money and all of that kind of stuff. So Jewish people did get decent, in some sense, for survival's sake, at one of the few professions we were allowed to do. And now, what's happened? What do we find now? I don't know what your view is, but how common it is you hear things like, well, the Jews, they're all rich. The Jews control things. The Jews have all the money. Look at the Jews own the banks. The Jews this and that. And, well, gee, thanks, You made us do that, and so we got good at it, and now you're blaming us for it like it's a terrible thing. So there's roots of all these things that we have in our modern society, that you have to understand and to deal with properly. Okay, we better keep going. And I think that there's less on the second half than the first half, so we should be okay. Finally, in the Middle Ages, the last, a couple more things. Blood libels. Blood libel. That's a particularly nasty thing. My son was just studying about it in college. Dad, did you? The blood libel is... all right, I understand. I'm not insulted, by the way. I understand, Chuck. All right. How many of you need to leave before 22? My goal, I'm racing to get done by 22. Would that be all right? Okay, we'll go for it. Blood libels is this story that was started in the 12th century that said on Passover, the Jews kidnap a Gentile boy, murder him, and use his blood to bake matzah. Okay? And that story, yeah, it sounds gross, doesn't it? That story continued in various places throughout Europe and all over the place for centuries and centuries. The last one was in, it was either Russia or the Ukraine in the 20th century, in the early 1900s. That story continued. And that story was always the cause of great grief. And, mobs would go in around that time and sort of take revenge for that thing. But I was looking around online a little while ago. The story has morphed in some of the Arab countries, even as like in the 90s, just 5-10 years ago, the story cropped up in one of the Arab countries saying that the Jews had kidnapped an Arab child, murdered him at Purim time, which is another Jewish holiday, and used his blood to bake hamantaschen, which are like, they're jelly triangular cookies that you have at Purim time. So, blood libels. Okay. Expulsions. I don't have I do have it. There were expulsions. Normally I put this stuff up on a screen and you can be seeing all this, but I'll just show you a list. I won't give you all the dates. We were expelled from Belgium, from Italy, from England for 500 years. You'd think, England? No Jews allowed in England for 500 years. Yep. France, Germany. The German case is kind of interesting. 1348 was the Black Plague in Europe. As fitting, all this stuff that I'm telling you, the Black Plague, wiped out I don't know the numbers, but, we all have heard of it. It was said that the Jews caused the Black Plague by poisoning the wells, the water sources of the Christians. And so we were kicked out of Germany because we were the starters of the Black Plague. Now, it's been shown clearly much later that the Black Plague was actually caused by rats coming from China on trade ships, and they spread some disease that wound up being the Black Plague. But, all right, we were also kicked out of Spain, Portugal, Lithuania, Poland, Germany again, a couple hundred years later, Austria, the Czech Republic. So, and I have the dates of all this stuff. But expulsions were very common. You've heard the wandering Jew. Well, I guess that is why. Before we go to the modern era, just one last thing. Martin Luther, great church leader, reformer. We owe spiritually a great debt to Martin Luther and some of the other reformers. His 95 Theses on the Wittenberg door, etc. With all of the good that he did, for some reason at the end of his life, or near the end of his life, he decided to publish a treatise called On the Jews and Their Lies. I will read you just a small quote of that. There was a friend of his, another church leader, I don't remember the man's name, who, my understanding is, really begged Martin Luther to not publish that, saying that it would not be a good thing to do, but he went ahead and did it. What was I going to mention? Why did Martin Luther write this? We don't know. Some say maybe he was losing his faculties at the end of his life. We don't know. Some say maybe because the Catholic Church had not done a good job trying to evangelize the Jews, convert or get expelled or die by this sword, that he would take a kindler, gentler approach. And his expectation was he would see many Jewish people come to faith in Jesus, and when they didn't, he got frustrated and disappointed and angry. We don't know that that's true either. So we don't know why he did it. But In 1543, he published it, and here's part of what it says. He says, "What should we Christians do with that rejected and accursed people, the Jews? First, burn their synagogues with fire. Secondly, it is necessary to uproot and destroy their houses. Thirdly, it is necessary that all their prayer books and their books of the Talmud be taken from them. Fourthly, that their rabbis shall be forbidden on pain of bodily punishment and death to teach. Fifth, that the Jews shall be absolutely forbidden to move on the roads. Sixth, that all their money be taken from them. Let us expel them from the land forever." Not very friendly words from Martin Luther. All right, we're going to move now, and we'll close up 5 minutes. Wow. We will. I understand. If it doesn't take 5, it might take 8. But we'll go to the modern era. Most of the Jewish people you know, I'm only guessing, are either, even if they're secular-minded now, they probably belong to either Reform or conservative synagogues, although in Reform it's usually called a temple. Until about the 18th century, all you had was Orthodox Judaism, which is very similar in a sense to the kind of Judaism we see in the New Testament. Those were the beginnings. Those rabbis we see here were the proto-Orthodox rabbis in a sense. But in the 18th century in Europe, you had the Enlightenment, coming out of the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages. You had nationalism. People were becoming citizens. No more serfs, vassals, and lords. I said that for you. Everybody kind of finding an equal footing in society. And a lot of Jewish people said, hey, this is good for us. Democracy in France, etc. So that we can be equal members of society, we need to blend in. We need to be more like everybody else and not dress differently and worship on a different day of the week and be so different in so many ways. So Reform Judaism was an attempt to make that possible. Reform Judaism, originally, they worshipped on Sundays. They had organs in their, Jewish people don't have organs in synagogue, but they put organs in their temples. And they got rid of this notion of God bringing the Jews back to Israel, because if Israel's really your country, you're always suspect if you're going to be a loyal citizen of this country. So, they changed a lot of theological things. In any case, shorten that story up a little bit. A little while after that, some Jewish people said, boy, you Reformed Jews have gone so far, I can't even tell if you're Jewish or Gentile. We need to pull back a little bit. And so the conservative Jewish movement was started after Reform as an attempt to find some middle ground between Orthodox and Reform. Okay, you had pogroms in Eastern Europe in the modern era. What's a pogrom? A pogrom is basically kind of the things I've been describing a little bit, but it's basically an unruly mob that goes to a small Jewish village and wreaks havoc. We had a exactly. If you saw Fiddler on the Roof near how the Cossacks would always go in, and the Jewish people were afraid of the Cossacks, and that's a pogrom. Yeah, that's a good example. There was a woman on our music team who told me the story that her grandmother told her that every Easter or Good Friday or Easter, whatever, when her grandmother was a little girl in Europe, her family made her climb a tree and stay up in the tree. What? Why? The reason was because the family had experienced pogroms and they wanted to hide their daughter up in the tree so she would be safe in case this happened. Pogroms often happened after a passion play on Good Friday. Okay, we all know what a passion play is, right? The story of the crucifixion and the resurrection of Christ. There's a very famous passion play in Germany. It still goes, I think it's every 10 years, in Oberammergau. Well, they've sanitized it. They've cleaned it up, which is a good thing, after complaints in our era from the Jewish community. But that play historically was was laced with anti-Semitism. The Jewish people had horns and tails, and they were just really portrayed very negatively as the Christ killers in that passion play. And there were other passion plays. And so what would often happen was The crowd, this was one way of educating, I think theologically really, educating the populace who, many who couldn't read during the Middle Ages and stuff like that. So they would watch this play, learn history and about their faith, and they would be whipped up into sort of a vengeful mob, a frenzy. And the priest oftentimes, after the Passion Play, would march them to the Jewish community and kind of let them go wild and take out revenge. That's a pogrom. So hopefully that helps you understand when Mel Gibson puts together a movie called The Passion of the Christ, which is depicting those same, it's a Passion Play in film, why the outcry of the Jewish community was there, because historically Passion Plays are not good for the Jews. And they were afraid that this could stir up crowds, even in America, definitely they thought in Europe. But that's why. That's the background on that. Also in the modern era, just a few more things. The Holocaust, of course, 6 million murdered. It just forever changed the psyche of Jewish people and changed the Jewish experience. But after the Holocaust, we have the birth of Israel, Zionism, the Jewish people returning to the land, which is a good thing. Let me now give you a quote, and then we'll just go to the end of the talk. There's a Holocaust scholar by the name of Raoul Walberg. Not Raoul. Raoul Hilberg. I think this is actually a brilliant quote. Even though it's incredibly sad, it's incredibly brilliant. He says this, quote, and this is going to string together what I've been talking about for the last 35, 40 minutes. He said this: the missionaries of Christianity had said in effect, you have no right to live among us as Jews, right? You can't be a Jew and a Christian. If you become a Christian, you have to renounce all your Jewish stuff. All right. The missionaries of Christianity said, in effect, you have no right to live among us as Jews. The secular rulers, the emperors who followed, had proclaimed, you have no right to live among us. And so all those expulsions from this country, that country, all those expulsions. The German Nazis at last decreed, you have no right to live. All right? So he strings together, this experience of the Jewish people so succinctly. I just find it to be very powerful and really descriptive of our experience. Let's just let me do this. I'll give you just a few other Jewish cultural values and then some conclusions, and we're done. Underlying any Jewish cause, every other Jewish value, they all tie into one value, and that is survival. And based on this history, it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? But you can pick up Jewish books, Jewish articles, Jewish magazines, films. They all are, on one level or another, are about survival. We fight assimilation, so we preserve our identity. We fight intermarriage, so we preserve our community. We fight anti-Semitism, so we preserve our safety. We support Israel and Zionism to preserve our homeland. We educate our children to preserve our future. We fight the missionaries to preserve our religion. It all has to do with survival on one level or another. And intermarriage is a huge concern to Jewish community leaders, etc. All right, let's just go to the conclusions. Jewish history, granted, and I think it should be clear to you now, is filled with tragedy. However, this is no excuse for Jewish people rejecting Jesus. To not evangelize Jewish people is actually anti-Semitic. If you believe Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and that no man comes to the Father but through him, and you say, yes, but in light of, and believe me, churches do this, in light of all the terrible tragic church history toward the Jews and anti-Semitism and persecution, and there are churches and denominations, whole denominations that say we don't evangelize Jewish people. We don't target them. They have a covenant with God through Abraham, and so we try to have dialogue and allow them to live in peace as somehow brothers in faith on some level. Well, if we believe Jesus is the only way, and without him people go to hell, if we say, well, we'll evangelize everybody else but the Jews, that's really the ultimate anti-Semitism. However, Jewish people need to see Christian love. Jewish people need to see Christian love. Now, love does not preclude confrontation at times. If I see you make an error in your checkbook, the loving thing is to try to point it out to you. We can make truth claims and confront someone with something that we believe is true, but we do so in a loving manner. Jewish survival, so important to Jewish people, depends on God, not on our own Jewish efforts to survive. The Lord said in Jeremiah, he who appoints the sun to shine by day and decrees the moon and stars to shine by night, who stirs up the sea so that its waves roar, the Lord Almighty is his name. Only if these decrees vanish from my sight, declares the Lord, will the descendants of Israel ever cease to be a nation before me. So the Lord says, as long as the sun is shining and the moon's there, Jewish people I'm going to keep them intact. So we can remind our Jewish people or your Jewish friends that God has promised to preserve us. And finally, Jewish people are spiritually hungry. And to respond, we must proclaim to them the promised Messiah, Jesus, or Yeshua.
Thank you for watching. Your support really does help this channel grow. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment.